Oh boy. Welcome back to Never Did It. My name is Garoon. I'm here with Jake Ziegler. On Never Did It, we look back at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. And this year, we're looking at the year 2002. This is a very special year. It's the year I graduated from high school. It was Jake's freshman year of college. We hadn't met each other yet, but we watched a bunch of movies. So because of that, we couldn't find a ton of movies to recommend for each other. And in our scrambling to find movies to recommend each other, we found too many movies to recommend for each other. So that's a long way of saying this is a double episode. We each recommended 2 movies for the other to watch. Jake recommended, I'd say, some more conventional, well-known, never did it type movies for me, and I recommended for him a couple of train wrecks. So, I mean, Jake, you'd seen like every single movie in 2002, so this was pretty tough. But I managed to find one. That we'll start with. That I was surprised you hadn't seen because you're in it. And that movie is Big Fat Liar, starring Frankie Muniz, Paul Giamatti, and Amanda Bynes in Happier Times. Amanda Bynes. Actually, it's funny. Big Fat Liar is kind of like an actor's graveyard of people who don't work anymore.
Seriously, yeah. Child leads, don't do acting. Like Frankie Muniz is completely done, isn't he?
I don't know what his story is. I know he's a Republican, so it's harder for him to get work, or at least that's what he says is the reason it's hard for him to get work. And Amanda Bynes her personal life has fallen off a cliff. You can follow her on social media. It's very depressing. But Paul Giamatti is a very successful actor still, the person who came out of this smelling like roses the most. Can you just, real quick, I know, because you've seen like every Paul Giamatti movie, clearly not every, but you've seen most, and you're not allergic to movies for kids, so why hadn't you seen Big Fat Liar?
Well, like you said, this came out during my freshman year of college, so I was consuming a lot of films at the time, but I was, generally on a more like, highbrow level thing. My Giamatti obsession was going to start the next year when American Splendor came out. Like, that was really the first time I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's amazing. I'd seen him in a couple of things, like he had a small part in The Truman Show, and I'd seen Private Parts that he's very funny in, but really the Giamatti obsession started with American Splendor in 2003, and then Sideways in 2004. So at the time Big Fat Liar came out, it was like, this is not a serious movie. I'm not obsessed with Paul Giamatti yet, so it just kind of didn't have any appeal for me at the time.
That makes sense. So like right now, and yeah, I guess it's pretty much the same. Like I am obsessed with Dave Bautista. I mean, we've both been big fans of his for a long time, but I think 2 movies away from having seen every single movie he's been in, and a lot of that is crap. And even when his new mediocre, like he had 3 movies. No, sorry, he's about to have his 4th movie come out this year.
Wow.
In the Pamela Anderson Showgirls movie, which actually looks good, but he also had Spy Kids 2 come out this year. He had Killer's Game come out this year, and Dune 2 came out this year. And I watched all of those right when they came out. But I'm already in my Bautista obsession. So
yeah, it would be my Spy 2, not Spy Kids 2.
You're right. Spy Kids 2 is long gone. And like My Spy 2 and Killer's Game were both like perfectly fine 3-star movies, nothing special. You don't need to go out of your way to see them. Because I waited so long to get into it, I have had to watch a lot of really, really rough exploitative B movies that he's been in, because I wasn't watching them at the time, and so you weren't watching Giamatti movies at the time. That makes sense. And who's going out of their way to watch Frankie Muniz? Okay, so Big Fat Liar is about a couple of big fat liars. Frankie Muniz is a kid he's like a Dennis the Menace type,
a ne'er-do-well
who is getting bullied for reasons that don't factor into the plot. Actually, I can't wait to talk about this movie. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, like there's so much weird crap to talk about. But he lies a lot. He lies compulsively. He doesn't like to do his homework. He's a slacker. The thing is, we never really see him lie like successfully for any extended period of time. But he compulsively lies, and that makes it so that he'll have to go to summer school unless he writes this essay. He ends up writing the essay about this liar character as he's rushing to get this essay to his teacher in time. He gets hit by a limousine. Inside the limousine is producer character Paul Giamatti, Derek Wolf, something like that. The Wolf Man, Marty Wolf, of course, because I think it's a little bit supposed to be like a dig at Scorsese and a dig at like gross Hollywood producers. And this guy who's also a big fat liar, he ends up stealing the Big Fat Liar screenplay. And the movie is Frankie Muniz's revenge plot to get this guy to admit to his dad that Frankie Muniz is not a liar, but Marty Wolf is the liar.
Just in this one specific case. Like, he's like, this time I'm telling the truth. Yeah.
And there is like, in the beginning, you're like, oh, it's the boy who cried wolf. There's something, they could do something with this. It's made by mostly the same creative team as Good Burger. So I actually went into it with kind of high hopes because I'd never seen it before, by the way.
Oh.
I'd never seen it. I just had heard that it has like its own kind of like Good Burger-esque cult following. As we know, love Good Burger. Turns out Good Burger's a lot better than Big Fat Liar.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what'd you think of your namesake's movie? Your face-sakes movie?
Yeah, you know what? I liked it ish. I mean, it's a pretty bad movie by any measurable standard, but my wife and I watched it on like a Friday or Saturday night, and we got ourselves in the right mood and headspace to watch it. And obviously, we didn't expect too much from it. I didn't know about really the Good Burger connection or anything, so not expecting too much from it. It was kind of fun to watch, Giamatti before he was, really the actor, the high level actor that he's become now. Just in a movie where he's just kind of doing something crazy and doing something that we don't really see him do stuff like that anymore. And he's a different kind of actor now. So certainly enjoyed that. And it was also one for my wife. She was she's 10 years younger than me. So when it came out, she was about 10 when it came out. So she actually has really fond memories of it coming out. So nostalgically, she was really enjoying it. And when you're sitting with someone who's enjoying a movie, it's a lot easier to get caught up in that and enjoy the movie as well. So we had a fun time with it. But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty dumb movie. I wouldn't really recommend it to anybody, but yeah, under the circumstances, I had a good time with it, and I gave it like 3 stars on Letterboxd. So yeah, I liked it, and I liked seeing Giamatti, of course, in just about anything.
It's really funny you say that, because when you were in town, you both were in town for my wedding, we watched the movie Renfield all together, and I could tell that the two of you were enjoying it, and that did not make me enjoy it anymore. I was like getting angry watching you guys laugh at the movie. I watched Big Fat Liar on my phone on a train on my way to visit my in-laws for Thanksgiving. I just couldn't help but connect it to Good Burger because it's got the vibe, right? It's the Nickelodeon crew directed, produced, the guy who got into a lot of controversy about sort of like child abuse, I think. I forget his name, but he was part of the creative team on this. The director is
Sean Levy.
Sean Levy. Yeah, right.
You hate Sean Levy.
Yeah. Well, I just think after watching this, I was like, what the crap? This is the guy who gave us Deadpool versus Wolverine? God damn it. That's another thing that's worth pointing out when the story doesn't make sense for most of the movie. This is the Deadpool and Wolverine guy. Sure, that makes sense. But Dan Schneider wrote the movie, and he's the one who is, disgraced for good reason. And then the producer was Brian Robbins, who is a major, he was in Head of the Class as an actor. He was a child star, just like Dan Schneider was a child star, and then became a big kids movie producer. So they have a mixed track record, but have made some good movies. As I'm watching this, I'm like, why is there so much just like crap happening that doesn't matter for the movie? Like Frankie Muniz is getting bullied in the beginning, and then the bully becomes an ally of his because he lets him do the homework, and the bully cross-dresses as Amanda Bynes so that the grandma will... But why is the grandma character important? Then there's a sister character for 5 seconds who goes off with her wannabe black guy boyfriend. They never show up again in the movie at all. Then you've got Paul Giamatti, who's just doing like the biggest performance he could possibly do. Basically being pig vomit from Private Parts, but just the temper tantrum parts the whole time. And I just didn't really understand what the point of it. I mean, I guess if it's just like colorful things for kids, then fine. But the only like colorful set piece was when they turned his skin blue. And that was funny.
He didn't blue himself. They blew him.
They're children. Oh, and then I think the most egregious thing about this movie, and I actually have very little else to say about it, is just that every once in a while, take like a quarter step towards establishing a romantic link between Frankie Muniz and Amanda Bynes, and then never execute on that.
Mm-hmm. They just keep them friends, yeah.
But they don't even say like, oh, we should just be friends. They just never address the fact that every once in a while, one of them a little bit flirts with the other one, but then nothing.
Yeah. Which, is probably fine. The last thing that movie needed was another subplot of something that was never going to go anywhere.
I just wish they had never done the little like, you're glad to be here with me, aren't you? You're glad, aren't you? Stop doing that. You're not going to do anything with it.
Well, and since it was a movie that came out in the early 2000s, it definitely did. My wife and I kept saying, okay, we just wait for the when's the montage coming where they're going to be doing something where they're trying on a bunch of different outfits set to a early 2000s pop song, and then boom, there it was. It's like, all right, this is definitely an early 2000s movie. It is very much a product of its time.
By the 5th montage, I was ready to turn it off. It was montage after montage after montage.
Hey, that's just how they made movies back then, man.
It was just an excuse to juice the soundtrack.
Yeah. Still bought CDs, so they're trying to sell those CDs. Yeah,
true enough. Just yesterday, I was on TikTok, and Brandon Treadway, Brandon Talks Movies, did his weekly 5 movies to watch on streaming on the different streaming platforms, and he recommended a movie called Gentlemen Broncos that was directed by Jared Hess. I don't really like Jared Hess, but like Nacho Libre, we've talked about bad wrestling movies before. Nacho Libre is a movie that just does not understand what it thinks wrestling is. So that's an annoying one for me, even though I quite like Jack Black. So he recommended Gentlemen Broncos. And as he was giving the description of it, I'm like, that's weird. That sounds like the exact same plot as Big Fat Liar, except there's like kind of a Rashomon aspect to it because the stolen manuscript, it's about an adult played by Jermaine Clement who steals a manuscript or a novel, actually, sci-fi novel by the kid from Sky High, whose name I forget, but I usually like him a lot. And one of the cooler things about this movie is that you see the content of the novel in like really cheap sci-fi fashion, but based on whose version of it is. Sam Rockwell, who's playing the main character in the novel, is like dressed completely differently and acts completely different. So it's pretty funny.
That's awesome.
But it's just, yeah, it's not a great movie, but it is interesting, and it's cool to watch back to back with Big Fat Liar to see, like, because Big Fat Liar doesn't address what Big Fat Liar the paper was about at all.
No,
we never really know. We just see Donald Faison, who has a small part in the movie version of Big Fat Liar, shrink down at the end. It's so dumb. Anyway, so that's a long way of saying Big Fat Liar I gave 2 stars. Gentlemen Broncos I gave 3.
And I gave Big Fat Liar, I think I mentioned I gave it 3, so you average it out 2.5 stars. Not a strong recommendation or anything like that.
All right, well, tell us about one of the movies you recommended for me.
Ooh,
why don't we start with Adaptation, because I've just been so eager to talk about it because I love this movie so deeply and I have loved it since the day I saw it. This movie is a little bit hard to describe because it is an adaptation of a book, but it's also not an adaptation of a book because it is The Orchid Thief is very much a real book, and I have read it, and it is about Jean LaRoche, who is a real person, who's played by Chris Cooper in the movie, and Susan Orlean, the writer of the book, is very much a real person, who's Meryl Streep plays in the movie. Charlie Kaufman, who is very much a real person, is played by Nicolas Cage in the movie, and this is all Charlie Kaufman was trying to write an adaptation of this book, into a movie form. But what ends up happening is that in the movie, he's struggling to write the screenplay because as a book, and I've read the book, it's really boring. I had a hard time reading it. I mean, I read it 20 years ago when the movie came out and I was obsessed with it. And I was like, I had a really hard time reading it because like all the things he says in the movie, it's not a conventional story. There's not characters learning things about each other. There's not action. There's not, it's not an orchid heist. It's not, a drug movie. It's not a drug book. It's not any of those things. So that's kind of what the movie's about, is his struggles as a writer and as a human being. He's a very deeply neurotic person who's just struggling to put together this screenplay and, to put together his life. And at the same time, there's a fictional character named Donald Kaufman, who is also played by Nicolas Cage. They're twin brothers. And Donald is kind of the polar opposite of Charlie, where he's more, a lot more easygoing, still has his insecurities, but is a little bit more confident in himself. Also wants to be a screenwriter like his brother, but is a very different kind of screenwriter, is writing a horror movie, and he seeks advice from their mother. One of my absolute favorite lines in this movie, and I quote it when I'm talking about things, and anytime someone like disagrees with me on something, it's when he's describing one of his plot twists to Charlie, and he tries telling him like it doesn't make any sense, and poor Donald just looks at him. Mom called it psychologically taught. And it's so funny the way he delivers it because he's so serious about it. And then Charlie tries coming back with something, and then he just, no, Mom's right, very taught, just kind of gives up on it. But yeah, it's just a very, very creative movie, and it's hard to talk too much about it without kind of giving away like where the movie goes, but it really veers off into some wild directions. I mean, it's pretty old, so if we want to get into like how, like if we want to really spoil the whole thing, we totally can. It just really veers off into some wild directions, and like I said, I love it. This is a 5-star, one of my favorite movies. It's definitely occupied some time in my top 4 on Letterboxd before. I mean, I changed those like everybody does, but it's been in there before, and it'll be there again.
Yeah, I just changed mine for the first time in quite a while to reflect some movies that we're going to talk about next week. So I'm really glad you recommended this because I'm a big fan of Charlie Kaufman, even though there are some movies of his that I find either too challenging, like Synecdoche, New York, or kind of like beneath what I think he's capable of, like Orion in the Dark. But I think Eternal Sunshine is incredible, and Spike Jonze I think is a really interesting person who has a really, really high batting average, mostly because he's not directed that many movies. I'm going to go on a little tangent here. Last night, Annie and I started watching All That Jazz. I was like, wow, Bob Fosse might have the best batting average of any director ever. He only made 5 features. They're all considered great. Lenny is one of my favorite movies ever. And in All That Jazz, it's kind of similar to Adaptation, where it's a biography, a fake biography, a fake autobiography. Although in Adaptation, Charlie Kaufman plays Charlie Kaufman is a character, but then there's Donald, like you said, this fake twin. And in All That Jazz, he has a different name, and all the names are changed. But Roy Scheider is playing Bob Fosse, and he's making the movie Lenny, and it's called The Stand Up in the movie. So these two movies actually have quite a bit in common, and they're both great. And Spike Jonze, much like Bob Fosse, has made very few movies, and they're all good, like really good to great. And this one's no different. I do want to get right into spoilers, though, because I want to ask you what you think about the read. So, big time spoiler. If you haven't seen Adaptation, go watch it. It's easy to find. Well worth watching. Jake just called it one of his favorite movies. I thought it was great also. Okay, here we go. Donald dies at the end. What do you think of the read that Donald and Charlie are just the same person?
No, I don't. I don't think that's the correct read at all. I definitely think that within the confines of the movie that they're very much two different people and have been for the entire movie. I mean, I think they're very deliberately like two different distinct personalities and like kind of two sides of the coin, sort of thing, and that they're very different. But I wouldn't say at all that they were like any sort of the same person.
I don't think the movie is telling you they're the same person. I found Charlie Kaufman's character arc is more fulfilling if you see it as Donald, who is not a real person in real life, as we keep saying, is an aspect of Charlie's own personality, or is an aspiration that Charlie feels like he can't reach and is annoyed by it. So like think about the things that you find annoying about successful people. Some of those things are always going to be, I'm not that. I find that annoying and that's successful, and that alone irritates me. I mean, one of Charlie's biggest struggles in the movie is Donald is he just decides all of a sudden that he's a loser, and he decides all of a sudden, I'm going to be a screenwriter too, and he has immediate success. Mm-hmm. And all of his ideas are things that Charlie finds trite, but he's so successful right away. And then immediately he gets a girlfriend when Charlie's having trouble in his romantic life. And Charlie is trying so hard, so terribly to meet women. Donald has no problems getting Jake Gyllenhaal's sister to be his girlfriend right away. And not just that, Catherine Keener, who Charlie can't have a normal conversation with on the set of Being John Malkovich, which is in this movie, she is immediately drawn to Donald.
You should hang out with her, Charlie.
But immediately after Donald dies, Charlie's relationship with his mother gets better. His relationship with the woman he's pursuing has hope. He's able to finish his screenplay. So I agree with you in that I don't think the movie is telling you that they're the same. I think at least I enjoyed the movie more thinking about it like Donald was this, not necessarily his twin brother, but was this thing hanging over him that he aspired to, but was embarrassed of. And then he sort of embraces that after Donald's death. And that made me like the movie a lot. I mean, I would have liked the movie even if I just thought of it as like Donald is a bizarre... Also, Donald might be the best role Nicolas Cage has ever done.
Amazing. Just so... Oh my gosh, yeah. It's just... It's amazing, yeah. And I like your read of the movie too. I agree with like that whole... the explanation that you have of that, because yes, all of those things are true. That Donald, whether, he's conceptual or real or whatever, like Donald definitely teaches him how to do all of those things. Like the Donald character definitely serves all of those purposes. So 100% agree on all that. And yes, I mean, the dual roles, I mean, Nicolas Cage, I think this is unquestionably the performance of his career, and I am a big Nicolas Cage fan. I like Nicolas Cage in good movies. I like Nicolas Cage in bad movies. I've seen a ton of them, and I mean, I find something to enjoy about almost every Nicolas Cage performance, and this one is my absolute favorite, and it's because of the dual roles. And what I love so much too about this movie, because there's this great scene in the beginning with Tilda Swinton where he's first describing like what he wants to do with the movie, and he says all of these things like, I want it to be this, and I don't want it to turn into a drug movie, and I don't want anyone to fall in love, and I don't want anyone to learn any lessons, and I don't want any of this. And then literally like every single one of those things happens like within the last act of the movie, which I think is just so perfect and such a great way to tie up the movie at the end of it. So it's just fun to go back and watch it. Having seen, I mean, like I've seen it probably 5 or 6 times over the years, and just to go back and watch that when you see that scene and kind of know where the movie's going, it's still fun to watch after over and over again for me.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch it again. And my favorite thing though is Susan Orlean, like you said, real person, did not like what this movie turned out to be when it was produced, and had to be very thoroughly convinced, like, trust us. It's good. You're going to have a good sense of humor about the fact that you are portrayed as a drug-addicted murderer by the end of the movie.
And again, Meryl Streep too. I mean, one of the greatest actors of all time. What performance by her in this. I mean, she is really going for something different here, and she's so funny in it. When that scene too, when she is on the phone with LaRoche and she's getting him to do the dial tone with her, everything when she's high on the whatever I mean, that is so fun. One of the funniest things I've probably ever seen her do, and funny too. I mean, Chris Cooper, he won the Oscar for this. All three of them were nominated. Cage, Cooper, and Meryl Streep were all nominated. Chris Cooper was the only one of them who won, and he is perfect in this movie. And he's got a couple of quotes too that I've repeated over the years, like when he's talking about his various obsessions and how he's able to just give them up. And he's just like, then one day I was just done with fish, that's how much fuck fish, like I say that all the time, like that. Yep. That's how much fuck fish, like when we're done with something. I mean, it's just, he's got so many great little lines in there. Just when he's describing himself, he's like, yeah, I'm probably the only white man who knows how to do it. Or just, I'm probably the smartest man I know. It's just like, he's just, I mean, everything he says is perfect, and how he's so, it's kind of his appearance is kind of outwardly, I don't know if I'd say gross, like that's too much, but he's gross.
He's unappealing.
He's very unappealing, but like the more he talks, and this is what happens with Susan, or like the more he talks, and like the more she spends time with him, like he's a fascinating, like really an interesting guy.
Yeah, what I think is cool about their like movie within a movie, which is like a book within a book kind of thing, is that their characters or their character paths cross and then go in opposite directions. Because when we get to Charlie and Donald have discovered the affair between Susan and LaRoche, she can't have this become public. LaRoche is like, well, tough, like we're screwed, and she's like, no, we'll kill them, and he's like, I don't want to do that. It's the opposite of how you expect their characters to react, which is wonderful. Yeah, so A+ for all this. It's interesting, the last 5 years have been very quiet for Chris Cooper. I mean, since he was in that really bad Jon Stewart movie Irresistible, I haven't heard of him being, I mean, I'm sure he's still working, but I haven't heard of anything he's done.
Yeah, I was trying to think of the last couple of things, because he's one of those guys too who every time he shows up in something, I mean, he's just a highlight of it. One of those guys who even in a mediocre movie just kind of makes everything better. I mean, I think between this and his little performance in The Muppets when he does that rap, these are my two favorite Chris Cooper performances.
Well, Maniacal Laugh was like a big internet meme for a while. I'm very, very embarrassed to say that my first maybe I don't want to talk about this. My first exposure to him was the 1997 movie Breast Men, about the beginning of breast augmentation surgery, a movie that I've seen like 4 or 5 times. Him and David Schwimmer just putting in fake boobies.
Yep. Well, the first thing I saw him in is actually, sorry, I'm going to out highbrow you here, but I saw him in John Sayles' Lone Star was the first thing I saw him in, which was I saw that before I saw American Beauty, which I think was probably the first thing a lot of people our age probably noticed him in.
Well, I think you're giving people our age too much credit. I think more people knew him from Breast Men, which he made a year after Lone Star, than Lone Star. I mean, probably most people know him from American Beauty originally, but Maniacal Laugh, so good. Maniacal Laugh.
And again, so unexpected from him,
Yeah. So let's pivot back to the other side of the table. This is a weird one. I recommended that you watch, and that I watch, the movie 8 Women, because we both happen to own this DVD. I didn't know anything about this movie. I bought it because it was on a list of movies you can't stream. And I was like, the premise sounds interesting, and I can't stream it. Turns out I think you can watch it on Mubi outside the US, but not in the US. This is basically like the feminine Hateful Eight. It's about 8 women trapped in a house in France. It's a French film in the 1950s. There's a snowstorm. They can't get out. I'm telling you, Tarantino has never cited this, to my knowledge, as an inspiration for the Hateful Eight. But by osmosis, it had to have gotten to him because it's the same plot.
Yeah. Well, it's Knives Out, too. It's like Knives Out with some singing.
Right. Well, that's the other thing. It's a musical. It's bizarrely a musical. And the premise is it's a family. It's an older woman and her daughter. And her 2 daughters, and then one of those daughters' husbands and 2 daughters of their own, the house cook, the home cook, and the maid. And then later, the husband's sister shows up. We never see the husband's face. We only see these 8 women. And early on, the husband is found dead with a knife in his back in his bedroom. And so it's kind of a whodunit, although there's not actually that much investigating going on. It's just as the movie goes on, someone will sing a song and then admit a little bit more about themselves. But no one's actually investigating anything. And that's the full plot of the movie. What did you think about 8 Women?
It was nuts, man. I bought this DVD a long time ago because it was at the time it was kind of an Oscar contender. Like it was the French selection for international film. I think that there was still foreign film back then, but that was the French selection. And I remember it being a strong contender that year. And I had bought it a couple years probably after that because it wasn't, or many years after that. But because I had wanted to see it and it wasn't streaming anywhere, so I had it for a little while. And it was an acclaimed director who I'd seen a couple of his other movies. I saw Swimming Pool, and I can't remember the other one, but I think I'd seen one other of his movies. It's nuts, man. I mean, by the time they're, rolling around on the floor at the end after singing songs and making out with each other, I mean, it's just, it's crazy. It's another one of those movies where like it doesn't all exactly hold together, but it's just so out there and so much fun in a weird sort of way that I did enjoy it. The songs are, if you don't know that it's a musical coming, like I knew that it was a musical coming in, but the songs definitely feel like they come out of nowhere. Especially like the first couple, like, oh my gosh, yeah, they're singing now.
The first one is the best one, I think. I love that opening song. Actually, the two granddaughters, their songs are like far and away the best. They've both got a bit of like a bossa nova beat to them. Here, just real quick, let's go over this cast because it is also bonkers.
Incredible.
So you got Catherine Deneuve, Isabelle Huppert, Emmanuelle Beer, who is the most attractive woman to ever live. I mean, I fell in love with her watching Mission Impossible, but in this one, and her song is a disaster, and her dance during the song is a disaster. And then Fanny Ardant, Virginie Ledoyen, Danielle Dero, Ludivine Sangye, and then Firmin Richard. I'm sure I pronounced at least half of those wrong. Everyone is pitch perfect in this, and the pitch is, what if Amelie sang songs? Yeah, you're right. Like, not only does it not hold together, the story doesn't make a lick of sense. The conclusion is both, I think, a disaster and traumatic. Like kind of mean. Big spoiler for 8 Women, which I'm sure no one has seen that listens to this podcast. So take a beat or fast forward just like 20 seconds if you don't want to know. It turns out that the murder was staged by the youngest daughter to get the family to all admit how they've all treated this father badly. Meanwhile, it seems like the father might be a rapist. So it's okay if he's treated badly. There's like an offhand comment where the granddaughter, she's like, "Dad is the father of my child. Good thing I'm not biologically related to him." Like, they never go back to it.
Yeah, which by the way, she wouldn't have known at the time he raped her.
No kidding. Well, that's why she says. That's why she says, "I'm actually relieved to learn he's not my father." So that's crazy. That's crazy.
Never mentioned again after that. She says it the one time, then it's just like an offhand, like that blew my, like I almost had to like pause the movie there and be like,
did I hear that right?
Let me just digest this for a second. Yeah, because like, so remember when we did the Sweet Hereafter, and it was like the way that they presented it there was like, whoa, kind of the same thing, or it was like it was a shock when they just kind of presented it, but like that really played into a lot of the movie. It was like, okay, it makes sense now. Like once you kind of let the movie, you absorb the movie a little bit more. Like, okay, like that makes sense now. But this one just completely out of nowhere. It had like little to do with anything. It was so shocking and strange.
I was very upset by it, and then I hope that those of you who are avoiding spoilers are still avoiding spoilers, because then the granddaughter admits that it's all been a ruse, that she and the dad were in on it together. And then she goes in to reveal the father, and he's holding a gun to his head, and he shoots himself in front of her. What the crap? And then she just comes out and cries. They sing another song. The grandmother sings a song, and then they bow. That's the end of the movie. Mm-hmm. So I can't say this is a good movie, but I can say it was a wild thing to watch.
Yep.
It was kind of like, I got a similar feeling to after I watched Book of Henry. This is a much better movie than the Book of Henry, but I had the same feeling like, I can't tell anyone that they should watch this movie, but I want them to. I want to talk to people about how batty this movie is.
It's weird. Yeah, it's it's hard to recommend, but also like I kind of want to recommend it.
Yeah. So that's a weird one. Maybe one day we'll come up with our list of like bad movies that this isn't even a bad movie, but like not good movies that I want you to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I ended up giving it like 3.5 stars because...
Me too.
Yeah, great. All right, we're in agreement.
Yes. Okay, so let's go back to, for me, another 3.5 star movie, but for very different reasons. Yeah, and I know for you, a 5-star movie. Talk to me about Frailty.
Yes, you gave it the rating that said you thought you should like it, but you actually didn't. Is that the 3.5 stars?
No, so I think I said on Letterboxd what I really thought of it, which was like, it's good. I like it, but I have these problems with it. And at the end of the day, it reminds me of these movies like Prospect or that Adam Sandler sci-fi movie that just came out, were like, these are really just episodes of Black Mirror that are getting feature treatment. And to me, this felt like an anthology horror story that's getting feature treatment. Like I think this story would have actually worked better in an hour than it worked in an hour and a half.
Well, let's talk about what that movie is, because we haven't even the title yet. That movie is Frailty, and I recommend it for you because, for me, it's a 5-star movie because I watched it in 2002 when it came out, and, I wasn't, Masters of Horror, I didn't know anything about that, or like Black Mirror, of course, wasn't a thing back then, and I saw it, right when it came out at the theater, and I think I saw it like 2 other times at the theater because I was like so obsessed with it. I just really, really loved it. I'm a big Bill Paxton fan. I've always been a big Bill Paxton fan. Rest in peace. Big loss when we lost him. And I had interviewed him actually a couple years after Frailty came out, when my former life as a film journalist. And when I spoke with him, I was interviewing him for his second directorial feature. I should mention he's the director of Frailty. This was his directorial debut. And I interviewed him for his second feature, which was a golf drama called The Greatest Game Ever Played. But when I spoke with him, I told him like, I had seen, I've seen Frailty, and, I noticed, I like made some comparisons, to whatever, like to the movies, and talked with his, and I gotta say, he was like so excited that I had seen Frailty, and he talked about it so much. I was like, maybe we should talk about your new movie. I don't know. Like, I thought like he was like really, really pumped about it. And you could tell that like he really loved it. And I think that, just kind of that experience too is like, it's so strong in my mind of like talking to him about Frailty that just kind of cemented my love for it too, like just knowing how much he loved it and how strong his memories of it and how much he wanted to talk about it. But this is a movie he, like I said, he directed. He also stars as a father. He has 2 young sons. The wife and mother died giving birth to the last son, so it's just the 3 of them. They live in a small Texas town, and they just kind of live a quiet life. The dad, he goes to work every day. The older son kind of takes care of things as best he can, and one night the dad busts into their room and says that he's been visited by an angel, and the angel has told him that there are demons among them, and that the end of days is coming, and that they have been selected to be warriors for God, and that they will be given a list of names of people who look like humans but are in fact demons, and that they are to destroy these demons. And he wholeheartedly believes this. The dad does. He has no doubts about this at all. He subscribes to it right away and is ready to do this. The younger brother believes everything the dad says and is ready to join him and do whatever the dad needs him to do. But the older brother is immediately skeptical and thinks that this is murder. It does not go along with the dad at all. And that leads to, obviously, to a lot of tension between the dad and the older brother and the younger brother as well, who, the younger brother wants to please his father, but he also wants to be nice to his brother. He wants to have continue to have the good relationship with his brother that he's had. A lot of, there's some family drama there, obviously some horror elements to the movie as well. I really, really love this movie. So tell me a little bit more about what you thought about it and why you hadn't seen it, until now.
I've always wanted to see it because you've always said such great things about it. You've always told me I should watch it. I like Bill Paxton a lot, and I was curious what his directorial style would be. And it turns out it's Sam Raimi is his directorial style. Another thing I said in my review, which is something that only happens when you're watching too many movies, is you just start to pick up on every single influence that especially actors turned directors have. And as I was watching this, I'm like, oh, there's Jonathan Demme. Oh, there's Sam Raimi. Oh, there's Tommy Lee Jones. He's friends with a lot of these guys. So it makes a lot of sense that he would do this. There's Alfred Hitchcock still showing up too.
Hitchcock, of course, was a big one for him. So, he definitely talked about that, and Sam Raimi too, because he'd worked with them just recently.
Yeah, they're good friends, or were. I thought that part was cool. Like just this, or even like there's Brian De Palma. There's a scene where the brother and the father are talking at the dinner table, but they're at different distances away from the camera. Paxton does a deep focus, and I'm like, oh, he's doing his Jonathan Demme thing. Like, I feel like I'm watching Blowout. And of course, he's influenced by Demme by De Palma, because De Palma was like the coolest at the time. I thought that was neat because it brings like a film language to the movie immediately. Paxton, as a hardcore thriller movie fan, knows how to construct a thriller movie, and he does. The movie's very well constructed, except in that there are 2 big twists in the movie, and I saw both of them coming like a mile away because the framing device of the movie is unnecessary. Like, I don't think you need McConaughey, who plays the older version of one of the sons, to talking to Powers Booth about the history of the family. I think there are probably more clever ways to do that. I'm not trying to Monday morning quarterback this movie. I don't know how to make it better. I'm just saying the narrative device gave away to me what the ending was going to be. Not every piece of it, like the supernatural aspect of the ending, I couldn't have guessed, because why would you? But but the major familial twist, I was like, yeah, come on, obviously. I thought that the kid actors were actually really, really good. The older brother more than the younger brother, but that makes sense. One thing you left out in your description of the family is they start the movie already very religious. So they're going to be prone to this religious hysteria that grips them throughout the movie. So anyway, these are all things I like. I'm not going to talk too much about things I didn't like because aside from the twist being, I think, obvious, there's not much. There's really just one thing, and now I've forgotten it. I had it on the tip of my tongue. I mean, that piece of it's cool that like you're left guessing throughout most of the movie, could this be real? We're seeing it through the point of view of the son who thinks that the father is gone crazy. And then, okay, so big spoilers, right? Spoiler alert. Oh, now I remember the other thing I didn't like about the movie. Mm-hmm. So one thing I like, one thing I didn't like. The thing I do like is that it turns out in the language of the movie, it's real. These are demons. At the very least, they're bad people and they've done awful things. And they, quote unquote, deserve what's coming to them. What I didn't like, or what I didn't really understand why it happened, is why did the older brother who doesn't kill demons become a serial killer?
Because he is a demon.
Because he's a demon. I guess you mature into your demonic self, right? He kills his father. That's the first murder he does.
Well, his dad knows he's a demon. His dad says it earlier in the movie. He's like,
he says it right before he dies himself. He says, "I know you're a demon, but I can't bring myself to do anything about it." And then
he says it earlier than that. He says it much earlier than that.
I only remember the part like right before they're about to bring that guy who the younger son kills down into the cellar. The dad pins the older son up against the wall and says, "You're a demon, but I can't bring myself to do anything about it. Maybe the angels will change their mind," or something like that. When does he say it earlier?
I don't think he says it to him earlier than that, but he like alludes to it. Like I can't remember exactly, but he alludes to it earlier than that, where like he knows. But
there is a piece where the son can't see once he lays his hands. The older son can't see that the guy's a demon, and Paxton is wrestling with that. Like he's upset that he can't see it. Maybe you'll see it next time, or you'll definitely see it next time. It almost makes me wish that the movie was told from Paxton's point of view, or at least like there was a part of it told from Paxton's point of view, because that's an interesting movie too. Like, my son is bad. What do I do about that?
We need to talk about that.
Yeah, I think that would have been interesting. Anyway, so I totally understand your 5-star review. I think it's a great movie. I just thought like, wow, it's pretty repetitive. Although, as usually happens on this podcast, the more we're talking about, the more I'm like, the things I didn't like actually do kind of fit better than I thought they did.
Well, and again, I saw it in 2002, without the 22 years of knowledge and films that I have gained since then. So, I mean, at the time in 2002, I didn't have all of that in my head to watching it. And it just kind of, it was a big one for me then. I really, and I watched it again, and I still had all those feelings came back. And I think it's really tightly constructed and, really well acted. Like you said, the two kid actors are both terrific. That was the first movie for the older brother. It says right in the credit, introducing Matt O'Leary, I think is his name. And he's gone on to do some other things. I looked up his credits, like, gosh, I've seen these movies, but I don't remember him being in this, but I know I've seen some of those things. And Jeremy Sumpter, the younger brother, went on to do some other things too. So they did great. And of course, like I said, I love Bill Paxton and things. And Powers Booth is kind of one of those underrated character actors too, who is just like, I love when he shows up in things. He's got the right, just the right tone and the right intonation for the character he plays. And, McConaughey is McConaughey, doing his thing.
I actually thought Powers Booth felt like he was in a different movie.
Really?
Now, I like him. I'm a huge Deadwood fan. Powers Booth also, rest in peace. We lost him a few years ago. Usually, great smarmy villain in most things. Absolutely despicable in Sin City, good actor. But here I was like, he's in a soap opera and everyone else is in a taut thriller.
Psychologically taut, yeah.
But yeah, so he's another one who's unfortunately passed away since the movie came out.
Oh, and Tombstone. If we're talking about Powers Booth, we got to mention Tombstone. Yeah.
Never did it actually, but that is probably the movie he's most famous for. I know.
Yeah. I know. Oh man, if you had ever seen Schindler's List, Tombstone probably would have been my choice for 93.
Look, we got to keep the podcast going after we finish in 25 weeks. So
right, yeah.
Before we get to our top 10s of 2002, why don't you just run back again? Is it just Adaptation that got Oscars for this year?
Yep, just Adaptation. This is the four that I mentioned for Adaptation. Best actor Nicolas Cage. He lost to Adrian Brody of The Pianist, which, Adrian Brody's very good in that movie, but I mean, I believe Cage should have won, even though he'd already won one for Leaving Las Vegas. I feel like Cage should have won that year. But also 2002 was like a historically great year for Best Actor. Nicolas Cage, Adaptation, Adrian Brody, The Pianist, Jack Nicholson, About Schmidt, Daniel Day-Lewis, Gangs of New York, and Michael Caine in a movie called The Quiet American, which I think is underseen, but he is phenomenal in. So, I mean, Cage didn't win, but the competition was insane. Meryl Streep was nominated Best Supporting Actress. She did not win. She lost to Catherine Zeta-Jones. Jones from Adaptation, from Chicago, which is a terrific movie, and Zeta Jones is great in it. Chris Cooper did win his award. Adapted screenplay also lost to The Pianist, which I think is a crock because, I mean, Adaptation is, I think, one of the most interesting, inventive, and cool screenplays that's maybe ever been written. And also, I think it's really funny that they got a credit on the screenplay for Donald Kaufman, who does not exist in real life.
You can. It just shows you can do anything you want with credits.
You really can. Yeah. But yeah, none of the other movies. I mean, there was some idle chatter, like Frailty maybe could sneak in for an original screenplay, but I mean, it's one of those movies where it's not going to happen, but some people try to talk it up maybe. And then, like I said, 8 Women was talked up quite a bit as France's entry for foreign feature, but it didn't materialize. So
let's dive into our top 10. So this is a big year. I'll try not to say all of my honorable mentions, but I do want to shout out a few. Just briefly, Phone Booth, I talked about it recently as like the movie where I discovered Colin Farrell as a good actor. Hero, a really cool Jet Li wuxia film. Wuxia, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that's the kind of movie it is. Yeah. Disney's Treasure Planet, a very cool adaptation of Treasure Island. I guess I am just doing all of my honorable mentions. Christopher Nolan's Insomnia is probably his most underrated movie. I think it's the only one he didn't also write in addition to directing.
Oh, it's a remake too of a Norwegian film, I want to say.
That makes sense because they had to go to the only place in the United States where the Insomnia bit would make sense. Curtis Hansen's 8 Mile, I think, is really good. I got to see it in Detroit, which was cool.
Curtis Hansen also pops up in Adaptation in a very brief cameo.
Who was he?
He's when they're at the dinner table at Susan Orlean's house with like her husband and all their friends. He plays her husband, and David O. Russell is in that scene too.
Very cool. P.T. Anderson's Punch Drunk Love, one of Adam Sandler's best performances, although now that's kind of a crowded field. This was for a lot of people being like, oh, he can do anything, Adam Sandler. That's cool. Justin Lin's Better Luck Tomorrow, which in some circles is considered a part of the Fast and Furious franchise because the Han character appears in this movie. So that's cool. It's not an action movie. It's a high school drama. Adaptation is in my honorable mentions. I think it's wonderful. The Bourne Identity, Doug Liman's original beginning of that really cool action franchise. Honorable mention is David Fincher's Panic Room, which we've talked about at great length on our David Fincher episode. And then that'll go right into my top 10, where I'll talk about another movie that we've talked about at great length on a ranking episode about Schmidt, the Alexander Payne movie that I just think is really great. It's one of Jack Nicholson's wonderful, near the end of his career performances. I'd go back and watch that episode. It's really good. Of our podcast and of this movie and this movie. My number 9 is Spike Lee's 25th Hour, starring Ed Norton, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Barry Pepper. Barry Pepper, where are you? Please come back to us. I don't even care if you've done something weird that's gotten you off my screen, but I want to see more of you. 25th Hour rules. My number 8 is Jackass. This was so huge for me in 2002 because me and my friends did Jackass videos, and then this movie came out. We were like, well, this is everything. This is literally everything. But my knee is still screwed up because of that. My number 7 is what was until recently my favorite Lord of the Rings movie, The Two Towers, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. I now think Return of the King is just an all-timer epic. Two Towers is still really cool, but it is the darkest of the 3. My number 6 is the first of 2 Steven Spielberg movies on my list for this year, Minority Report. If you need evidence that Steven Spielberg is the greatest director of all time, both in 1993 and in 2002, did he put out 2 all-timers. Minority Report is one of those 4 movies. I wish Tom Cruise would do another non-Mission Impossible movie so badly. Although this 8th movie looks pretty good. I'm excited for it, but it has a completely unsung, amazing performance by Max von Sydow as the, spoiler alert, villain. And it's another great Colin Farrell performance, actually. My number 5 is a movie that we're going to be finally getting another sequel to soon, 28 Days Later, Danny Boyle's, I think, best zombie movie of all time. This is where I was introduced to Brendan Gleeson. This movie is scary and also awesome. It gives you a lot to chew on, lots to think about. It rules. My number 4 is a movie by a director who just had a bomb come out, unfortunately. Jake Kasdan's Orange County. People don't seem to be liking Red One. Watch a different color movie of his, Orange County. It stars Colin Hanks, Jack Black, Skylar Fisk. She's great in it. Lily Tomlin's really funny in this. Mike White is funny in this. Catherine O'Hara is unstoppable in this. And then, of course, you've got John Lithgow giving the performance of a lifetime. He will eat your face. Something happened to me recently where I was like, the only reaction you can have to this is the John Lithgow, what the fuck? What the fuck? Upon seeing his wife get massaged by the gardener.
Which is less.
What did you say? Oh, it was Leslie Mann. Yes. Chevy Chase is also in this, but only for a minute, and it's kind of forgettable.
Ben Stiller, who has like one little cameo in it.
At the very end, yeah. Very, very funny. I think this is one of the funniest movies of all time, and I think it's brutally underseen and underrated. I was kind of hoping when the Jumanji movies got big that people would go back and discover Orange County, and it didn't really happen. And I have to shout out, because I haven't said it, but they are so funny in this. Kyle Howard and RJ Knoll as the two idiot friends. Oh, this movie's perfect. See Orange County. It's so funny.
My daughter will still say, Viv will still ask me if it's like his death birthday, man. Like Viv still quotes that.
It's his birthday. It's his death birthday. My number 3, I know you don't like this one as much, but I think my 3, 2, and 1 are 3 of the best movies of all time. My number 3 is Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York, the only Scorsese movie I like more than you do. I don't think Cameron Diaz is that bad in this. She is miscast, but I think she rises to the occasion. It's got an all-time Daniel Day-Lewis performance in it. He's unreal. DiCaprio doesn't quite have the accent down, but I can forgive it. I think it's wonderful. It also has a comeback from Henry Thomas, who got famous in E.T. John C. Reilly's really good here as a real bastard. Liam Neeson has a brief but impactful role. And it's another great Brendan. What a great year for Brendan Gleeson. Jim Broadbent's also really good in Gangs of New York. My number 2 is City of God. Is this a 2002 for you or 2003?
It's a 2003 for me, because it didn't open in the States in 2003, and that's when it qualified for Oscars and stuff. But Ebert actually very famously included it on his 2002 list because he didn't want to wait a whole year to include it on his list. So it could go either way.
Understandable. I have not watched the miniseries sequel that came out last year of this, but I don't know if I will, because I want this Frozen in Amber, this movie about a young photographer living in Rio and the gang violence that's happening all around him. Incredible. First off, and it's bleak, but it's not like a dreary movie. It's got a breakneck pace. The cinematography is unbelievable. At every turn, someone feels like they're in immense danger. It's almost an action movie.
It's a clincher.
Yeah, it's a real clincher. And everyone in it is beautiful. So there's that piece too. Fernando, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Marier?
Yeah.
Something like that. He also made The Two Popes, which I think is really underrated. So
and the Constant really cool.
I don't like that one as much as you. That one's a little bleak for me. And then number 1 is a movie I often call my favorite movie of all time, Steven Spielberg's Catch Me If You Can. It's my favorite Spielberg movie. It might be my favorite movie. Tom Hanks, Leonardo DiCaprio, Christopher Walken, basically a 3-way of amazing, unforgettable scenes and lines. The mouse dropping into a cup of cream, coming in over and over again. I get so sad every time I think about Walken's, his last speech to his son in a diner, or in a restaurant, asking him where he's flying to next, before in the next scene we find out that he's passed away. And then Tom Hanks, killing it as a disgruntled FBI agent searching for this check counterfeiter. I saw someone post to Twitter recently that the scenes where DiCaprio and Hanks talk to each other on the phone, even though DiCaprio is living this like playboy lavish lifestyle, and Hanks's life is described as being quite dreary, whenever they're talking on the phone, Hanks always has a source of light near him, and DiCaprio is talking in a dark room to reflect like what they're really feeling inside. Spielberg is unbeatable. He is the king. And I think that it's very easy to make the case that no one will ever be better at storytelling and setting a scene than he is.
I agree. I mean, he's the top. I mean, he's the best.
All right, hit us with your list.
Yep. And almost all of the movies you mentioned, I would make my list in some form. Some of them, were 2003 movies, like 28 Days Later that came out in like the summer of 03. I know Phone Booth was like in 03. I like that movie too. Hero didn't actually come out in the US until 2004. That one took a while to get here, but that's why some of those, maybe wouldn't appear on my list. And then Lord of the Rings, I'm just not super into. But other than that, I think most of your movies would appear on my list in some fashion. But I'll hit my honorable mentions real quick here. Some of my honorable mentions would be Gangs of New York. Yeah, I like it a little bit less than you do, but I still think it's pretty great. Chicago, that year's Best Picture winner. I really enjoy I mentioned The Quiet American with Michael Caine. Brendan Fraser is also really great in that movie. That one's on my list. There's an ensemble drama called 13 Conversations About One Thing. Alan Arkin, McConaughey is in that as well. Very good. Stephen Daldry's The Hours with a trio of great performances. Actually, a quartet of great performances. You've got Meryl Streep, Julianne Moore, Nicole Kidman won her Oscar for that, and then Ed Harris is in that as well. Really excellent drama.
I do not like The Hours one bit.
I haven't seen it in a very long time, but that's my rating, what I have for it.
I think that movie stinks.
been a while. So Y Tu Mamá Tambien, movie that introduced American audiences to Gael Garcia Bernal and Diego Luna, who are both still acting in a lot of things and are still, it's a very, very visible, very cool movie. It's very different from anything I'd seen at that time. A controversial choice for an honorable mention, but I love Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I know a lot of people don't like those first two. I really enjoy it. I think Kenneth Branagh is delightful in it. I like all those movies to some degree. An underrated movie for me that's in my honorable mention is Samuel L. Jackson, Ben Affleck drama called Changing Lanes. Really liked this movie when it came out, and I feel like a lot of people kind of slept on it. It's one of those dramas where two characters crash into each other in a way that they don't expect, and then they kind of spend the rest of the movie basically trying to mess with each other. And it's really cool. I haven't seen it in a while, but I feel like it would hold up. But I remember really liking that. Frida with Salma Hayek and Alfred Molina, and a couple of great performances as Frida Kahlo and Diego, whatever Diego's last name was, who was married to Frida. They're both really, really great in it. One of my wife's favorite movies as well, but it's very, very good. And then another one that's in my honorable mentions, I saved it for last because it was your number one. Catch Me If You Can is an honorable mention for me, but again, I haven't seen it in a very long time, but it is a really great movie. It's Spielberg.
I insist you watch it again.
Maybe well, it came out at Christmas time, so maybe, this would be a great time to check it out again. Now, moving into my actual top 10. Number 10 is based on a Nick Hornby novel about a boy starring Hugh Grant and Nicholas Hoult. This is just a really terrific movie about a guy who never really grew up, and he learns how to grow up by hanging out with a young boy. And Toni Collette is in this as well. She's the mother of the boy. She's very good. Of course, Toni Collette, she's always great. And this is probably... I don't know, Hugh Grant, he's got a few more now under his belt, but at the time, this was easily Hugh Grant's best performance, and it's still certainly one of his best. Number 9 is a Russian film. It's called Russian Ark. It's one of those one-take movies. It's kind of it's a journey through Russian history as it goes through I can't remember the name of the museum, but it's like the big museum in Russia. It's like whatever the Louvre of Russia is. That's the museum it goes through, and it kind of takes you through the entire museum of that museum and goes through all of Russian history. It's in one take. It's really impressive, like technically just a superb movie and really interesting. I don't know anything about Russian history, so it was a really cool thing to see at the time. And also at the time here, there weren't a lot of those like one take movies, like in the time since, there's been like Birdman in 1917, and there have been some more of those, one shot movies, but at the time it was super unique. Number 8, movie we've talked about a lot today, Frailty, held up for me very well. So very, very happy about that. Number 7, a movie I also mentioned a little bit earlier, is The Pianist, Roman Polanski, very controversial, of course, but this movie is excellent. Adrian Brody is wonderful in it. Number 6, movie that we talked about a lot on a previous podcast and you've already mentioned, is Alexander Payne's About Schmidt. Yeah, I love everything about this movie. Nicholson is great in it. Kathy Bates is great in it. Small performance by oh crap, is it Dermot Mulroney or Dermot Mulroney? I can't never remember the Dermot or the Dylan. Dermot Mulroney is great in it. Just a wonderful, wonderful movie. Number 5, also on your list, Minority Report. Great Tom Cruise action movie. Great Spielberg movie. Colin Farrell really good in it. Just kind of a really kind of scary look at where we might be headed in the future. Number 4 for me is Almodovar movie called Talk to Her. It's about a couple of men who are taking care of 2 women that are in comas. If you like Almodovar, this is one of his better films, and with he's got a new one coming out, his English language debut. Might be a good time to go back and look at some Almodovar films. This is a great one. My number 3 is a movie that was on your 2001 list, but it came to America in 2002. Miyazaki's Spirited Away. I think most people listening to our podcast would be familiar with that one. My number 2 is a film by Todd Haynes, stars Julianne Moore, called Far From Heaven. It's a Douglas Sirkian drama of the 1950s of a housewife who is unhappy in her marriage, married to a closeted homosexual, and she starts a friendship with her gardener, who is black, which of course in the 1950s, very controversial. This was the first movie I also saw Patricia Clarkson in. She has a role as the nosy, snooty neighbor lady, which, gosh, she is born to play a nosy, snooty neighbor from the 1950s. But the score in the movie is incredible. The costumes are amazing. The cinematography is gorgeous. Julianne Moore, again, one of our greatest living actors, probably arguably one of the greatest of all time. This is probably her finest performance. Just a great movie. And then my number 1, as I mentioned several times, is Adaptation.
Great. We'll be back next week with 1942 to talk about a legendary movie that let us down and a movie that we didn't know that much about that we loved. See you then.